My name is Rodman Schley. As a real estate expert, I've invested millions of dollars in vacation properties all around the world, and I've been involved in the valuation of billions of dollars of properties. I want to share my 35 years of experience along with vacation home investment tips from the top minds in the short-term vacation rental industry. Now, let's do the work. Welcome to the Vacation Property Secrets Podcast. I'm your host, Rodman Schley, and our guest today is going to blow your mind about the financial power of opportunity zones. Ashley Tison is the co-founder of ozpros.com and has built a team uniquely positioned to handle acquisitions, securities, real estate, and tax nuances that are inherent in opportunity zone deals. We're fortunate to have somebody who's so passionate about helping all business owners learn to harness the value of opportunity zones. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Rodman, it's a pleasure, an honor and a privilege to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this conversation today because when you talk about short-term vacation rentals, a lot of times you're not thinking about opportunity zones. And I've worked in a lot of opportunity zones. I've done a lot of work, but nothing with short-term vacation rental. And you're the guy who's going to inform us on the opportunities that are there in those zones.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of the principle of the short-term vacation rental and being able to buy something that not only are you going to be able to make money on, but in an area and at a place and in a situation that you're actually going to want to use yourself or potentially be able to go there and that kind of thing. And it's really exciting that you can couple in that short-term vacation rental piece with the tax savings associated with it that you can use to offset, high W-2 income, which is one of the few loopholes out there to be able to do so. But then you can stack that with other tax incentive programs like the opportunity zone legislation. And it's really cool when you put all of that together. It makes a really special cake.
Let's start with what is an opportunity zone. Like I said, I know what it is. I really like the idea and the concept behind it, but there's a lot of people who probably are like, I'm just hearing this for the first time. Maybe you can give them just a little overview on what an opportunity zone consists of.
Sure. So opportunity zones were created by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. And in so doing, Congress wanted to incentivize private investment into areas that had been historically underinvested in. And so they said, listen, we're going to put this out there. We're going to create this tax incentive legislation, but we're going to put it in the hands of the governors to actually choose the places that they want designated as opportunity zones. And I got to hand it to them because in 3 pages of legislation, number one, they got the attention of private capital. Number two, they got it off of the sidelines and into these areas. And then number 3, they made it patient. And they did that through a couple of different incentives. First, you get to defer any kind of capital gains that you have. So if you sold a long-term vacation rental, right, while the market's hot and you've got capital gains through that, you can take that money, put it into a fund, be able to defer it until December 31st, 2026. And if you were invested for a period of time for either 5 years or 7 years prior to that deadline, you get a reduction in the taxes when you go to pay them. Those benefits have expired, which we think we're probably going to get back with legislation that'll probably come back around in 2025 after the election. But, those benefits they were nice, but they were kind of a rounding error compared to the big benefit, which is after a 10-year hold, whatever you've invested into now comes out with a step up in basis to fair market value. And that's significant because it eliminates capital gains. So it completely eliminates capital gains taxes on whatever you're investing in. And it also eliminates depreciation recapture. And so as a result, we've seen over $100 billion worth of investments come into these opportunity zones. And I get it all the time. People are like, well, if it's encouraging investment into like underinvested areas, aren't those kind of bad areas?
I was going to ask that exact question.
So I teed it up there for you, right? And the answer is no. This was based off of the 2010 census, right? So when the legislation came through, the 2010 census was the last one that had happened. And, things have changed massively since the 2010 census. And so you got to designate up to 25% of your low income census tracts. And not surprisingly, the governors, they picked the ones that they thought could attract investment the best. And those areas, a number of those areas have really blossomed, not only because of just normal growth, but also because of the Opportunity Zone program themselves. And so, there are 8,763, I think is what the number is.
Oh, wow.
Opportunity zones across the country. They're in all the U.S. territories as well. So all of Guam is an opportunity zone. And the 98% of the island of Puerto Rico is an opportunity zone. You want to talk about short-term vacation rentals.
Wow, I did not
Man,
know that.
Yeah, that's the place to do it. And it's amazing how some of these zones, so there's waterfront zones down in Georgetown, South Carolina. The Strip on Myrtle Beach is all an opportunity zone. Yeah, exactly. It's like mind blowing. It's like, what?
Yeah.
There's waterfront, down in, in West Palm, Miami, Newport, California, right? It's amazing, some of these zones. And as a result, those zones have actually seen a bunch of, development. And then it's also, driven investment into zones that are in rural areas. We made an investment into a piece of property that's up in the mountains of North Carolina that's in an opportunity zone where we're doing a retreat. So it's kind of cool how, it's available and people can do short-term rentals in these areas and qualify as, for the tax incentive.
So, Ashley, what do people need to do to identify these zones? Is it something they can look up online? Is it something that's easily attainable, that information to see where they want to go?
Well, let's talk about that. So, where do you like? So, where are you thinking about that you might want to invest? Let's see the nearest zone.
Well, so, one of the things that has crossed my mind, I've got my kiddo going to college here, going to San Diego State. And, I want to spend a lot of time out there. I'm in Denver. It's an easy flight in. It's like, well,
Yep.
maybe I'll just invest in a short-term vacation rental out there so I can rent something while I'm out there. And then I can fly and hang out with my daughter when I'm not.
So that's an excellent, excellent idea. And interestingly enough, almost every university that's out there, so the governors really figured out that, okay, let's try to find opportunity zones that are close to universities. And so if there's not one that's like directly contacting campus, there's going to be one in the vicinity fairly close around that in almost every university in the United States. So this is a great example of how you could utilize this program. So in San Diego, so if you go to ozpros.com/map,
Okay.
once again, that's ozpros.com/map, you can go in and it'll pop up a screen, right? Your kind of traditional Google Maps type deal. And then you can search, and literally I just typed in San Diego State and it popped up an example of San Diego State University, right? Oh, bam. Hey, what's funny is that like I actually pulled up the research center beforehand, but San Diego State University is dead in the center of an OZ.
You're kidding me.
It stretches, and that looks like water that's down there, like by the San Diego Convention Center and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Naval Base Commissary and that kind of thing. And there are numerous zones all around that. And so you go to the map, you pop that up, and then bam, that shows you exactly where you can look to find, like places that are inside of the opportunity zone. And as long as it pops up shaded blue, that's indicating that it's in an opportunity zone and that it's going to be eligible. So now you've figured out that you can find that there's a opportunity zone that's right next to San Diego State. So you go and you find a rental property, you find a property, and you put it under contract. The interesting piece, and this is the one kind of rub about OZs, is that you either have to have original use or you have to substantially improve the property. And the reason why they did that is that they wanted people to actually come in and create positive things in the zones. And so they're like, hey, we don't want people land banking. We don't want them just sitting on stuff. And so, hey, we want you to do something there. And so if you are buying a piece of property, you're going to have to invest whatever the building amount is. You get to exclude the land, but whatever the building amount is, you're going to have to invest that amount in improvements. So let's say that you came in and you bought a piece of property for $500,000, and the land, right, like on your tax, records, it shows that the building's worth 300,000 and that the land's worth 200,000. You're going to have to do $300,001 worth of improvements to it. Now you can do that in a number of ways. You can do it by adding bathrooms, kitchens, making things nicer. You could add solar to it. You could also, and this is really interesting, add an accessory dwelling unit to it as well.
Oh.
So that might be a really interesting play, particularly for you, because what's really fascinating about this is that you could actually have your daughter live in a portion of it, rent it out to her roommates, right? So is your daughter on payroll?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, there we go. I was going to say, man, I hope you're not leaving that one.
To the limit.
That's a $12,500 gimme from the IRS, right?
Yeah.
Well, at least till she turns 18. And then after that, they got to pay a little bit for FICA or FUTA and SUTA, I think.
Yeah.
But so you got a $12,500 gimme right there. And so you got her on payroll. She starts paying rent, right, to you, right, to rent the place out, because it does have to be a trade or business. So you can't have a second residence there, right? So it does need to be a trade or business, which most Airbnb short-term rentals are going to be that. And so she could live in one structure, and then you could Airbnb the accessory dwelling unit or vice versa. And now you're making revenue, right? Your daughter's there to manage it. She's making money for it. She's actually doing the job that you hired her to do. And you're able to turn, that short-term rental rate and then be able to set it aside for the times when you want to go down there and actually visit her. So
I'm in. I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
So it's funny is that I actually set one of these up for a client. His son is going to Ole Miss, and he literally just closed on it. And he bought a unit that was pre-construction. So that's one of the other original things. If you don't want to do the substantial improvement piece and you can find somebody that's got something that's almost complete, you can buy something pre-certificate of occupancy. And we've got language that you need to put into the contract and then how you need to close it in order to be able to chase your paper trail down. But he bought that. He's got his, he's going to be renting out the bottom of it to, his son's got to live on campus for the first year, but he's renting out the bottom of it to other, kind of college students. He's then renting out the top of it for Airbnb. And for the weekends that he's not going down to an Ole Miss game, because Ole Miss is a massive football deal, he's actually marketing it as an experience. So he went and he bought, he made like a $5,000 contribution to the athletic foundation. He got 50-yard line seats, right? So he's now got 4 seats on the 50-yard line, and he's packaging up the seats along with the tailgate experience with the Airbnb, and he's selling it for like $25,000 for the weekend.
Oh my gosh, I love this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, dude, that's genius, man.
It is genius.
I was like, I'd like to take credit for it, but all I did was, make it tax advantaged.
I don't know if we could get that kind of bang out of San Diego State, but
probably not.
Yeah,
I don't know. Well, hey, was it San Diego State that was in the Final Four on the basketball team?
On basketball, yes, they've got a great basketball team.
You got you can have. Something tells me that that you're probably not going to get $25,000 even out of basketball tickets, but. Hey, it's a great idea, right?
Yeah.
Certainly for SEC towns and SEC schools. Man, I love it.
So, Ashley, I get my property. I'm looking at making all these improvements, but I'm probably going to have to furnish this place too. And if I have to furnish it, does that count toward that allocation?
Absolutely. So whatever improvements you do, so like we talked about before, accessory dwelling unit, adding solar to it, building on the lot adjacent to it, all of that would count. And any personal property that you buy that's used in the trade or business that's happening inside of the opportunity zone, that's going to qualify as that substantial improvement piece. And so, yeah, if you've got to buy TVs and beds and all that kind of stuff, you could absolutely do that. Interestingly, let's say that you had you had a condo and it's got a boat slip down there by the condo, and you rent that boat out in conjunction with the condo. That could count towards your substantial improvement piece.
The boat itself?
The boat itself.
Oh my gosh.
Or if you've got to take a helicopter up to an Airbnb that's up on a mountaintop. I helped a guy do this deal here in North Carolina. It's called the Invisible Retreat, and he will ferry people with a helicopter up to the mountains from Charlotte. And that helicopter, because he keeps it in an opportunity zone, is part of his substantial improvement.
Oh man, that is crazy. But it's really cool. I mean, it's amazing. It sounds like there's so much flexibility and so many things that I would never have thought about
Yep.
until talking to you. And I'm sure that list is extensive.
Yeah, and what's also really neat is that it doesn't necessarily have to be real estate. So it can be any operating business. So when you invest into your fund, you can then invest into a qualified opportunity zone business, and that could be either real estate, it could be a .com, it could be a software development company, it could be an event management company, property management company, whatever that is. As long as it's inside of a zone and you're operating inside of the zone, that'll qualify.
So Ashley, 2026 rolls around. I got to make that tax payment. How do they figure that out?
That's a great question. And so the really cool thing about opportunity zones is that you either pay what your original gain amount was. So like, let's say you had $1 million in gain. You'd normally have paid $238,000 in taxes next year. But you invested that into a qualified opportunity fund, you put it into a short-term rental, and you've done your cost segregation study. But maybe that area hasn't picked up as much. So it's either on the original gain amount or the value of your investment at the time, as of December 31st, 2026. And so if you can show that there's a discounted amount, right, so that the value of your investment has gone down, and what's funny is that there's no guidelines relative to like what you have to do. It's not, your unadjusted cost basis. It just says the value of your investment at the time. And so you could put discounts on that in accordance with how appraisers do it. And so I think that there's going to be a real boondoggle for folks to be able to get in there and do appraisals on their properties, right? And be able to pay less money in 2026 than they originally had in gain.
Ashley, can you go in and, when you're talking about the allocation of the land versus the improvements, so, I mean, is that something as simple as going to the assessor's records and looking at their land valuation versus the improvement? Or do you have to have somebody come in and do that work?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you've got an appraisal that's done. But I mean, so I'm gonna tell you the ideal way is an appraisal. Second would be is if you're gonna do you're just gonna allocate in accordance with kind of the tax records, you need to extrapolate out to what the purchase price was. So put the percentage that was associated with the building on whatever your purchase price was, because 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be paying more than what the assessed value was. But for the really savvy folks, you're probably going to be getting a cost segregation study done anyhow.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you can do is that you can figure out generally, go get your quotes for how much it's going to cost to do your improvements. So let's say in that same $500,000 example, you know that you're going to be spending $200,000 on improvements. And you could go to your cost segregation person and say, hey, listen, I need you to assess this thing, and I need to show $200,000 of building value here. And I know I'm going to be doing $200,000 of improvements, so allocate that $200,000 into the roof, the floor coverings, the dishwasher, all the stuff that I can bonus depreciate, and that way now I've got a paper trail for that.
Yeah, it's funny, and I come from the valuation world, so I think in terms of appraisal a lot, and most appraisers aren't going to do a cost approach on something like that age. You're probably not going to get a land value and then an improvement value. You're probably going to get something based on a sales comparison approach or maybe an income approach. But the cost seg way to look at that is a good way to go because those guys will go into a lot more detail and get those basically allocated out.
Correct. And they're going to have the detail to back it up. And I think that that's the key, right? And so the greatest thing about the Opportunity Zone program, and I talk about this all the time, is that you don't have to ask anyone for permission. You don't have to go apply with the new market tax credit place and get an allocation. You don't have to go and seek approval from any kind of governmental person. You just do it. But within that, because all you have to do is do it, you need to make sure that you have really good records. And the more detailed you can make those records, the better off you're going to be for purposes of the IRS. And so that's one of the reasons why I like that cost seg approach, is because those guys get really detailed. They jump in there and they break it down in accordance with all of the stuff that is inside of that house. And it's kind of a twofer. So instead of a sunk cost, right, like it's an expense for an appraisal, you're actually getting the value associated with being able to grab that bonus depreciation off of it.
Right.
So
right.
you're able to kind of doubly use it.
It's amazing to me how many people, a couple things. And one thing that's amazing is probably there's a good number of people who are out buying these property types, the short-term vacation rentals, not even knowing they're in that zone, not
That's
even
right.
knowing. So they don't even understand they've got the opportunity there, which I get. A lot of times,
Sure.
it's hard to stay up with everything and everything that you're doing. The other thing is a lot of people don't do that cost seg, which is a huge, huge tax break right out of the gates.
Sure. And I mean, so everything that's coming off of this is ordinary income. And the reason why that cost seg is so valuable, and we talked about this before, and I'm sure that you've probably had lots of people talk about this on your podcast, is that short-term vacation rentals are the one loophole that you can use to offset and to utilize depreciation and bonus depreciation to offset ordinary income if you're not a real estate professional. And that's a big thing, because you could have one property and you could utilize all that bonus depreciation to offset your W-2 income without having to go through the 750-hour rigmarole that you would normally have to do. Now, you do have to show that you are actively involved in it, but that's 100 hours versus 750.
Right.
And it's easy to hit that 100-hour threshold. And so, I mean, I'm a huge, huge fan of that cost seg thing. One of the challenges about the cost seg deal is that if you sell it before you catch up on the makers, the modified accelerated cost recovery schedule, you end up hitting with what we call bonus or depreciation recapture. And so you end up paying income tax at your income tax level for any amount that hasn't caught up. Even more so, even if you have caught up, you're still going to have zero basis. And so you're going to pay capital gains on zero basis, right, for the amount that you have bonus depreciated. Opportunity zones eliminate that on both counts.
That's incredible. That is a huge, huge, huge bonus. My gosh,
it's the fourth unadvertised benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about, before, and you said this legislation came in about 2017, right?
Yep.
Before that, and I'm thinking back when I first moved into Denver, Colorado, there was an area down in Denver. They didn't call it an opportunity zone. They called it something else. Was there a prior term to an opportunity zone, or maybe they called it an opportunity zone back then too? It just changed in 2017.
I think they called them economic zones, or there was a zone word in it, and I think it was, so they had hub zones before.
Yes.
And then they had economic improvement zones.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah. And so there were different local and state tax incentives associated with it. And then the hub zone, if you were located there, you had different federal contracting opportunities and stuff like that. But nothing of the ilk that we saw with the opportunity zone legislation. That's the reason why there's been $150 billion worth of investment going into these zones.
Wow, that is incredible. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of stimulus, if you will,
that's right,
into the economy. But I know that when I first came here, there was that whole downtown area. It was an industrial area. It was blighted. It was in bad shape. You didn't go down there. But it was one of those zones where you could get incentives by putting your business in there.
Sure.
And there was a microbiologist by the name of, his last name was Hickenlooper. And I don't know if you recall him or not, but
I don't.
John Hickenlooper, he came in and he was a microbiologist, started a microbrewery.
Nice.
And then all of a sudden, about 2 years later, Coors Field was built down in that zone. So he became a multi-millionaire overnight with the real estate that he had bought down there. Eventually became the mayor of Denver, and then became the governor of Colorado, and ran for president about 2 terms ago. So it's one of those things where
really
you have a guy.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's one of those guys who took a chance in a zone that needed some upkeep, or it needed some rehabilitation. It needed some gentrification, and all of a sudden a millionaire overnight, and then he's your governor, and then a presidential candidate. It's amazing to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and so inside of that, right, it's the same analysis here, except that, I mean, it's a little bit tougher, I think, to do that now, to find that kind of alpha, right? Because even in these areas, there's still a fair amount of price appreciation that's already happened. And so that's one of the things that we regularly help people look at is, okay, what's kind of that next place that could potentially hit, right? I know there's a lot of people that are doing stuff in the Rust Belt because of that, right? They're like, hey, listen, there's still alpha associated with the purchase of this real estate. I can buy it. Rents are, fairly robust here, but values are lower. And so they're able to chase that alpha in those areas. One of the places that I think is, it's still kind of a gem that's in the making is Puerto Rico. There was a massive amount of value in that property because of what happened from the hurricane, and opportunity zones just increased the attractiveness of it and have increased people looking at it. But there's still alpha there as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into regions like that, I mean, are you finding that the land values are worth quite a bit more than the improvement values at that point? I mean, I know that you get into some of these zones where your improvements, maybe they, were impacted by, say, the hurricane, or maybe you've had the dilapidation and they need some regeneration. But if you're looking at those thresholds and you have to match what the improvements are, it seems like there might be more opportunity in places that have had some trauma, or maybe have had a little bit more depreciation in the improvements.
It's kind of interesting, and it's usually kind of situational. A lot of times what people are doing is they're going in and they're scraping it. And when you start with either raw land, or if you've demolished it, you get that original use classification. And so and that's easy, right? You don't have to, you basically have to do something more than an insubstantial amount. So as long as you build something on it and put it in service, you're good to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can usually make deals work. I would say that the one deal that is really difficult to make work is a condominium that's fairly high priced, that's, in an area that's, that for whatever reason, the values have kind of picked back up because there's no land value associated with a condominium, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's no allocation. They don't allocate a portion of the common area or the common land.
You do to a little bit, but the
But it's
lion's
just a
share
little
of it,
bit.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you maybe get to like 10%. And so it gets really tricky, so number one, it gets tricky to make the improvements, right? It's like, well, I could go and gold plate the sinks, right? Or I don't know, add robots to the deal or something like that. But it gets really tricky to make it pencil out from a rent standpoint. And that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. So what do people need to do if they're sitting out there, they're listening? I mean, number one, very intriguing, right? I know a bit about these things, but you've enlightened me on so many different areas that I had no idea. But that person who's sitting out there listening, going, man, I'd really like to take advantage of this. Where do they need to start? Where do they need to start doing their research? What is their first step in looking at opportunity zones?
So we've got a ton of information on our website, ozpros.com. And we've actually got a special deal for your listeners. If they go to ozpros.com/podcast, they can, we got discounted strategy calls on it. We've got we got an opportunity zone cheat sheet that they can download. We've got a webinar that's kind of a next step webinar that shows and we've got a lot of base information in. And then we've also got an enormous amount of information on our YouTube channel, and that's just youtube.com/ozpros. And so if they want to learn about it, they can go on there. We've got specific videos dealing with specific issues inside of it if they want to do a deep dive. And then probably the fastest way to get a PhD in opportunity zones is through our Ascent program. We do a weekly call. It's actually on Tuesdays. I actually had it earlier today. And we've got about 100 plus members that are in Ascent. And folks come in and they ask questions about their deals. And it's basically a mastermind. We've got that available on a monthly basis, on a monthly subscription, or on a yearly subscription. If you do yearly, you get access to all of our form documents and stuff like that. if somebody's got a capital gain and they're ready to go and they're like, listen, man, I want you to set me up a fund and get this thing rolling for me. That's our bread and butter. We've set up more than anybody in the country. We've done over 500 of them at this point, and we've got a package where we can do that soup to nuts for them. And then it includes a year's worth of access and questions and kind of follow-on guidance through that Ascent program.
So I would say if you're out there and you're hearing this, number one, yeah, go get the information. I always tell people information is key. It's golden, right? It's that thing that we're going to lift you up and it's going to save you so much money. It's going to put money back in your pocket. It's going to save you on taxes. But you got to understand it. You got to go get that knowledge. You got to gain that knowledge.
That's right.
But another thing I would say is if you're sitting there looking at buying something right now, or you maybe have something under contract or whatever you're doing, I'd go out to your website, see if it's in the opportunity zone. See
That's
if
right.
what you're dealing on right now is an opportunity for you to take advantage of this program, because you might be sitting on something you don't even know that you're sitting on right now.
Yep. So, and inside of that, a lot of times we can go back and fix it, right? So if somebody's bought something in an opportunity zone unwittingly, and they bought it in a like in an LLC or in a corporation, which hopefully all of your listeners are buying their stuff in partnerships and not in S corps, because you do not want to own appreciating assets in an S corp. Set up your S corp as a management company and then charge a management fee. But buy it in an LLC, and if you bought it in an LLC that's taxed as a partnership, we can make that into an opportunity zone after the fact. And so,
for how long? Is there a period of time, or is just
no? I mean,
you go back 10 years.
As long as they bought it after December 31st, 2017.
Yeah.
And then we can make it into an OZ deal right now.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of places that people can come to learn from you. I love it when I get somebody on the show who's just a breadth of knowledge, who comes in and gives so much information and so much takeaway. I mean, people, if you're listening to this stuff right now, I hope you're taking notes. If not, rewind and start taking the notes, and then get out to these guys, take a look at what they're doing, because, I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you take advantage of these programs if you're buying property, if you're buying these short-term vacation rentals in these areas that are available for this opportunity? It's a huge opportunity. So what do you think in terms of one piece of advice for people in terms of where should they start? If you could go back and give somebody one piece of advice that you think is the most valuable for people on the short-term vacation, what would that piece of advice be?
So I kind of liken it to advice that I took myself, is that I had a mobile home park that was on the outskirts of Charlotte here. And I was getting ready to be able to expand it. And I was looking at the brain damage that was going to be involved in that. It wasn't significant. I could get it done. But I evaluated that and I was like, okay, wait, I can either put this amount of effort into this and do well with it, or I can sell that property, take that gain, put it into an opportunity zone, exert the same amount of energy, and make 25% more money, because I'm not going to pay federal capital gains taxes when I exit. And I'm like, whoa, wow, that's a no-brainer. And so in the context, if you're doing short-term rentals and you've got the ability to potentially be able to locate them like a block away that's inside of an opportunity zone, you're crazy not to do that. Make an extra 23.8%. That's at current capital gains rates, let alone what it's going to happen in the future.
I'm sure they wouldn't raise our taxes, Ashley.
Imagine that.
Well, Ashley, I appreciate you being on the show today. I mean, seriously, a lot of great knowledge. And we know that knowledge is key, especially if you're going to be advancing at a rapid pace in life. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge. People, go out and find Ashley. Take a look at what he's doing. Incredible knowledge, incredible information. Make sure that you're tapping into it. So thanks for being on the show.
Robin, appreciate you having me on. It's an honor and a privilege.